I climbed Mount Kamine. I worked up a sweat during the climb, but there's a refreshing breeze now. From up here, I can see the gentle slopes of the mountains in Ibaraki and the Pacific Ocean behind the city of Hitachi. Looking down into the valley of the Miyata River, I can see factories in the distance and a smokestack on the nearby mountain. I think it was my grandfather who told me that the smokestack used to be a lot taller. That's why it's still called the Giant Stack.
The Giant Stack used to be a lot taller than it is today. The reason why it was so tall is the basis for our story. Once known as the Akasawa Mine, the Hitachi Mine is located in the mountains of Motoyama, approximately 8 kilometers from Japan Rail's Hitachi Station. In 1905, it was bought by a young entrepreneur named Fusanosuke Kuhara. He renamed it the Hitachi Mine after the village. It was at this point that the real development began. Ore is mined from the earth. It is then smelted and the metal extracted. Fusanosuke Kuhara had earlier worked at the Kosaka mine in Akita. He used this experience to forge ahead with modern mining developments. He built power plants and introduced advanced technology to mechanize the mining process. Searching for ores by boring became common, and manual mining was replaced with mechanized mining using rock drills. By using compressed air to operate the rock drills and pumps to remove underground water, it became possible to mine deeper into the ground. Naturally, more ore could be mined this way. The Hitachi mine became one of the 4 biggest copper mines in Japan, together with Beshi, Ashio, and Kosaka.
Old concrete foundations still remain on one of Mount Kamine's ridges. I guess this is all that's left of the old ropeway that used to haul away the waste rock from the mine. On the other side of the ridge is the little village of Irishiken.
About 2 years after the mine commenced operations, the summer buckwheat in Irishiken began to show negative effects, apparently from the smoke coming from the smelter. Sulfur dioxide in the smoke was the cause. These adverse effects spread to the red pine and chestnut trees that surrounded the village. Next year, the barley and the soybeans suffered. The local residents began to negotiate with the mine for compensation. The mine's manager of general affairs was Yataro Kado. He was in charge of the negotiations. His standpoint was very clear. The mine must compensate for the smoke damage. He made it a point to sincerely respond to the claims by the local residents. Investigations were quickly carried out, and compensation was paid once the charges were determined to be ethically and morally justified. Fusanosuke Kuhara was already planning to purchase ore from other mines and build an advanced smelter using a new smelting method that would allow for mass production. As this had the potential for causing major air pollution problems, Yataro Kado signed contracts with the surrounding villages that promised full compensation if damage actually happened. In due course, a Dio-in smelter with huge smelting furnaces was built. This was about 4 kilometers from Motoyama. However, as the copper production grew, so the air pollution increased. The damage was far beyond expectations and spread widely. The damage to forests and crops such as tobacco and buckwheat became severe. Anger and anxiety among the local residents grew, and discontent with the mine continued to rise. The mine came up with various strategies to prevent the air pollution, but all of their attempts ended in failure. The common practice of the time was to make the smoke thinner by releasing it through a short stack. A reinforced concrete tunnel 1,600 meters long was built on the mountain. It was designed to reduce the density of the smoke by releasing it through the tunnel's numerous ventilation ducts. Then, a short, fat stack was constructed, which was to reduce the smoke density by mixing it with air internally. However, these did not work, and the effects of air pollution spread further. The negotiations between the mine and the residents became heated. A man named Tokuji Kaburagi became involved and began to develop preventive measures for the pollution. In addition to the compensation negotiations and land surveys, he scientifically researched crops resistant to smoke and the relationship between damage and weather conditions. He also provided sensible guidance about local agriculture to local farmers. He gained the residents' trust and was much respected. However, the problems remained unsolved, and the worries of the residents continued to increase. Then, Fusanosuke Kuhara had an idea. The smoke naturally rises straight into the sky. A taller stack is certain to reduce the air pollution at ground level. The concept was to guide the smoke into the air as high as possible, where it could be dispersed by air currents. There were certain people who raised concerns over this idea. The smoke will just spread over a wider area, making the damage worse. The construction costs will threaten the company's survival. No matter how tall you make it, the wind will blow the smoke back towards the ground. So the arguments raged back and forth. Various experiments and meteorological observations were initiated to find the answer. High atmosphere wind currents were measured with tethered balloons. Experiments into smoke dispersal were carried out in wind tunnels. Other experiments into wind currents based on the flow of the river Kuji were also carried out. The results showed that smoke released at a high altitude would thin out and easily disperse. Tall stacks were more efficient than short ones. At last, a decision was made. The mine would risk the company's future and invest in the construction of a giant stack. At 155.7 meters, the stack became the tallest in the world. At that time, the most common method of building stacks was with bricks. However, the engineer Heisaku Miyanaga decided on an innovative method similar to that used today. The stack was to be built with reinforced concrete. Foundations were dug deep into the bedrock on the hillside. Scaffolding was erected. The steel reinforcement frame was fitted together, and the concrete was poured in. Although 36,800 man-days were involved in this mammoth project, the task was completed in just 9 months. Hitachi Mine had independently built the world's tallest stack. March 1915 saw the first smoke rising into the clear skies. The smoke became a cloud that rose higher and higher and finally dispersed into nothingness.
On the top of Mount Kamine, there's a shed that's supposedly an old abandoned weather observatory. I wonder why they needed one up there.
The air pollution was reduced drastically thanks to the giant stack. However, it was not eradicated completely. The reason seemed to lie in the atmospheric conditions. The investigation revealed that smoke would descend towards the ground when the wind blew in a single direction for long periods caused by low pressure or drizzling rains, and thick fogs were formed under low clouds. It was this phenomenon that was causing the air pollution. Following this discovery, the mine constructed meteorological observatories within a 10-kilometer radius of the mine, including Mount Kamine. These gathered information about smoke flows quickly. A telephone network was also set up. The Mount Kamine Observatory gauged the direction smoke was flowing from the stack and relayed this information to observatories that lay in that direction. The observatories monitored the situation visually and followed the smell of the gas to where it reached the ground, tested the density of the sulfur dioxide gas, and reported their findings back to Mount Kamine. The Kamine Observatory would issue warnings to the smelter in accordance with these reports. The smelter that received the reports would then reduce its operations, sometimes up to less than half of its normal capacity. Suddenly altering production in order to reduce smoke levels was a difficult task for the smelter engineers.
When spring comes, white flowers from the cherry trees bloom on Mount Kamine. I hear they're actually called Oshima cherry trees.
The Oshima cherry trees that bloom on the mountains surrounding Hitachi Mine were planted by the mine itself. Let's take a look at an old photograph. The mountains surrounding the smelter were almost bare before the giant stack was built. A project was initiated to return the mountains to their natural green state. Tokuji Kaburagi created an agricultural laboratory to determine which crops and trees were best able to withstand smoke. After many repeated experiments, it was discovered that the Yashabushi alder and the Oshima cherry were the hardiest against smoke. Growing the saplings from the Oshima cherry seeds acquired from Izu Oshima Island was the toughest challenge. The project continued the basic work of nurturing the saplings and then replanting them in the surrounding mountains. The number of saplings planted by the Hitachi mine reached some 5 million. Farmers were given fertilizer and the seeds of plants resistant to smoke. Instead of only using money to compensate those affected by pollution, the mine also wanted to improve local agriculture. Further emphasis was placed on reforesting the local area, and Japanese black pine, Oshima cherry, cedar, and other saplings were also distributed to the surrounding townships and villages. This continued for nearly 20 years, and 5.1 million saplings were distributed by the end of the project, bringing the total to more than 10 million trees planted. The reforestation project also grafted Some Yoshino cherry onto the Oshima cherry and created vast numbers of Some Yoshino cherry saplings. Yataro Kado took 1,200 of these saplings and planted them around the company's housing estate and alongside of the mine train railway lines. The reforestation project became the catalyst to encourage planting cherry trees near factories and schools. Cherry trees, which still line the streets, are the symbolic city tree. They're a reminder that the mine, local community, and companies in Hitachi work together to preserve the greenery and encourage reforestation. Research to eradicate sulfur dioxide gas from smoke continued. Gradually, results were obtained in generating sulfur from sulfur dioxide gas. This led to the construction of the flash furnace and tertiary sulfur plant in 1972. From this time, sulfur dioxide gas was no longer released into the atmosphere. The smelter had finally become pollution-free. Subsequently, the giant stack took on a new lease of life. Now it was directing the smoke from the recycling furnace into the atmosphere.
The smoke curls like white cotton from the smokestack, but it's not the same smoke as before.
The Hitachi mine ceased operating on September 30th, 1981. There was no more ore left to mine. But the giant stack still stood sentinel over all 4 points of the compass. It had become a symbol of the area. When the people of Hitachi returned to their hometown by train or car, the first glimpse of the giant stack in the distance would remind them that they were home, and they would breathe a sigh of relief.
So, why is the giant stack so short now?
It happened one sunny morning. At 3 minutes past 9 on the morning of February 19th, 1993, the giant stack trembled for a brief moment and then fell over. Like a candle gently burning out, it appeared that the giant stack's 78-year life had come to a natural end. The event came as quite a surprise. After being a part of the industrial city of Hitachi's life for so long, the giant stack was reduced to 1/3 of its original height. However, its familiar shape had become a symbol of the city, and it still lives on in the heart of the community.
That's why it's still called the giant stack, even though it's only 1/3 of its original size.
Despite being shorter than it once was, it is still thought of as the giant stack. The millions of trees planted, thanks to the mine and the local community, live on, spreading their beauty across the mountains as they rustle in the breeze.